Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be talking about the running backs who performed at the NFL Scouting Combine. Joe and I are going to give our winners and our losers.
Hike!
So, Joe, let's talk about the guy who I think probably got the most buzz, which was running back Jaylen Wright, running back of the Tennessee Volunteers. It was 5'10", 210, but had a 4.44 40-yard dash time with a 1.55 10-yard split with a vertical of 38. A lot of comparisons were being made with this guy with Devin Achane being how fast he was. What say you when it comes to Wright here?
Yeah, I think he's definitely an interesting player, and the fact that he showed off that speed and being heavier than Devon Achane as well. But that's who they were comparing him to. It's just interesting, especially at his side to get that comparison. But he definitely had a good day, and he was definitely one of the risers. And I would say him and MarShawn Lloyd were probably two of the more talked about running backs during the combine.
Oh boy, Joe! Now you're starting to get ahead of ourselves here. I'll speak to Wright here first. I think that he's intriguing. Not a guy who necessarily was on my radar, but obviously speed. Speed is the name of the game, right? So for him to be able to have that, you can't teach that. So it'll be interesting with these running backs, especially with the free agency class that's coming in. Because this is probably the best free agency class of my lifetime that I'm seeing. With Jacobs and Henry and Barkley, and a lot of these guys aren't necessarily going to be making it. You got Swift. The list goes on and on and on. So, it'll be really interesting to see where these landing spots go. But Wright is definitely in the conversation to being the top running back. Don't know if he's my favorite, but definitely a winner after the combine. So let's talk about a guy you just talked about, MarShawn Lloyd. So Lloyd, he finished as 5'8". So Joey's a little bit smaller. 220, 40-yard dash time of 4.46, the 10-yard split of 1.55, vertical of 36. Joe, sounds like you think he's a winner, MarShawn Lloyd?
Yeah, absolutely. Just the way that everyone was talking about, and especially with him being 220 pounds and from the 4.48 there. Is pretty good as well. And I just felt like him and he was talked about right up there with how much Daniel Jeremiah really seemed to like this guy and like the film that he had on him from USC. So, yeah, like you said, I don't know if he's necessarily my favorite, but definitely some guy that performed well and is a riser on my page.
Yeah, I think he's definitely somewhat of a winner, but I gotta tell you, I think he was getting a little bit too much buzz. I looked at the drills last year, and I looked at it this year. I wanted to see how we did because the 40-yard dash time, it's important, right? But we could just see that on a piece of paper. What was his 40-yard dash time? I want to see what did he look like in the drills. It did not look as natural to me as far as his receiving ability. That was the thing that people were really talking about as his receiving ability. And compared to his peers, I didn't think that he was as strong, in my view. He's not a guy that I'm running to go get in the draft. Again, landing spot's going to matter greatly. I felt there were some other guys, in my view, that performed much better in the drills. So I'm not as keen as others. I'm not just going to ride the gravy train. I know a lot of people got the buzz on him, and I'm going to go against the crowd a little on this one. I think he's a winner, but I think it's not as big as what the consensus is saying.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So let's talk about a guy who I would say caught my attention. I think he did for you as well, based on his Senior Bowl performance. That was Emani Bailey, running back out of TCU, 5'7", 202. This guy's definitely smaller, Joe, but did not perform very well as far as athleticism goes. Yeah, 4.67 40-yard dash, 1.84 10-yard split, which are poor numbers, and then his vertical was a 33.5. This was not the best day for Emani Bailey. I would say he's definitely a loser, but he looked good in the Senior Bowl. So what do you make of him?
Yeah, that's a tough thing. I was just, I wish he was going to perform well at the combine because, like you said, I hadn't really seen too much of him. But watch the Senior Bowl. I was pretty impressed with what I saw for him in the Senior Bowl. So I might put more stock in what I've seen in the Senior Bowl and just maybe, at these moments. And he's not just like a drill guy, but I think maybe when it's game time, I think he comes to play.
Yeah, I mean, Joe, I'm trying to be a little bit more. I'm trying to turn a new leaf here when it comes to height. But that,
Yeah.
I don't know. It makes me a little bit nervous.
Yeah.
I would say his stock is down for me for sure. I think he's a loser.
At
It's just going to depend
5'7",
on where he
I'm a
goes.
little heavier, personally.
Say that one more time.
At 5'7", I would like to see him be heavier than 202. To your point, not that I haven't always paid attention to like the height wise, but typically when the guys are a little shorter, they're possibly play at a little bit of heavier weight.
Well, let's talk about another 5'7" guy who, if we're concerned about the same thing, let's talk about Blake Corum. Your running back out of the Michigan Wolverines show ended up being 5'7", 205, so pretty similar weight. 40-yard dash time of a 4.53 and a 10-yard split of 1.59 and a vertical of 35.5. Now, I recognize that the numbers don't look good, but I don't know, Joe. I think Corum looks the part. I saw what he was doing in the drills. This guy just has very good vision. You even saw it in some of the tape that they were showing. I recognize he wasn't that good, but, depending on where he goes, I don't know if I really care.
Yeah, I do think he's one of the guys that where he goes, he might not need the exact fit. I think guy like Jaylen Wright, who they compare to Devon Achane, like going to need that type of offense like the Miami Dolphins that are based on like the speed and know how to get a guy in space and utilize him that way. Corum can bring a little of everything. And I know he didn't catch the ball a lot at Michigan, but he can catch the ball. I think he showed that during the drills there. But I think just watching that one drill, and I even saw it overlaid with MarShawn Lloyd, and just his reaction time and his ability to cut way faster really showed out to me.
That's exactly one of the drills that stood out to me. You saw there was because people are going nuts about MarShawn Lloyd, but Blake Corum, in my view, way better when it comes to that performance. So, he's a guy. He was my top running back coming in. I think he's. I think he's still there. There's one other guy that I think I'm possibly considering as well after the combine, and let's talk about him. That's going to be running back Trey Benson of Florida State. Ended up being 6 foot, 216. This guy did really well. 40-yard dash time of a 4.39 with a 10-yard split of 1.54. Not as good in the vertical, but I tell you what, they were making comparisons of this guy with Breece Hall. And I don't know. He definitely didn't his college career wasn't as good as a guy like Breece Hall. But I think Benson, he's right up there in my view as probably the top running back of the class. What say you?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this guy, I think I liked his tape from Florida State, and watching some of the Florida State games, I was always pretty impressed with the guy. But, for him to be that size and run the 4.39, that was really nice to see. And just another guy, I think, with the drills, he was pretty smooth as well.
Let's talk about another top running back. Running back Braelon Allen did not run the 40-yard dash time. He was 6'1", 235. I'll tell you, when you saw him amongst his peers, he looked like a man amongst boys. I mean, that guy was just huge. But I would say ultimately he was a loser for me. Had a ton of drops. In the past year. This guy, I don't think it's going to be able to be utilized as a third down back. And in this NFL, if you're going to be looking at a utilization standpoint, you want to be an all-purpose guy. Don't think he's that. Could get a lot. You're hoping from a fantasy standpoint he gets a lot of rushing touchdowns, which I think he could. He plays like a Derrick Henry. I don't think he is Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry is an anomaly. I mean, he's just as a mammoth of a man. Well, what do you think as far as Braelon Allen goes?
Yeah, I agree. I think I'd have to put him in the loser category as well. I mean, it's just so interesting. This guy, just a couple of years ago, everyone was like raving about him and looking to be like one of the top guys of, this potential running back class. And like, last year, especially, I feel like at Wisconsin, he just didn't look the same. I feel like he didn't have that explosiveness and everything that we had seen in the past. So I'm not really sure how to feel about him going forward.
Yeah, I don't either. Let's talk about another guy who I think was a loser in my view, who had some hype on him, and that was running back Bucky Irving out of Oregon. Ended up being 5'9", 192. Did not test all that well at a 4.56 40-yard dash, 10-yard split of 1.61, and a vertical of 29.5. I mean, talk about poor. That's real bad. So what are your thoughts on him? He was in the conversation of being one of the top running backs I think that the Daniel Jeremiah and crew, I think we're giving him some props, for his receiving ability. But I definitely think he was a loser for me.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you there as well. It's interesting. He definitely was getting some hype around him. But he's another guy too. Like he shows flashes in college and he's got some decent highlights and he's shown like his cutting ability. And, I think it's tough with some of these guys when they know so much is riding on this combine and trying to perform well. And maybe they just don't. But I think his tape had put out better stuff than what he showed at his combine.
Conversely, I'm going to talk about the guy who I think I was most impressed with as far as from a receiving perspective. That's going to be the small school guy in Dylan Loube coming out of New Hampshire. He's 5'9", 206. He's definitely a smaller guy. Had a 4.54 40-yard dash time with a 10-yard split of 1.52 and a vertical of 37. He even talked about it on the broadcast. He said, his role is going to be a third down back. But to me, he was the most smooth when it came to receiving. I'd heard about him, but I was really impressed in his receiving game. So I would say ultimately he's a winner, but I guess I don't know how relevant he's really going to be. I think he might be a third down running back. But other than that, from a fantasy standpoint, I don't really see that much production. And from an NFL standpoint, maybe just a role player.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I mean, he's a guy, obviously a small town guy. I didn't really know too much about him, but definitely learned some things about him at the combine. It's interesting. We have seen some of these receiver type. I think it depends on where he goes and if a quarterback in a system is going to value like jumping a ball down. Like Patriots always had those type of third down backs in their fantasy relevance. The James Whites of the world and everything like that. So just wonder if he can go to a similar system place where they utilize him, maybe then at that point he'd be relevant, especially if you play in PPR leagues.
Let's talk about a guy who probably took the combine by storm here, and Isaac Guerendo, running back out of Louisville, 6 foot 221. But this guy's athletic score was off the charts. Had a 4.33 40-yard dash with a 10-yard split of 1.51, an athletic score of very, very high and a vertical of 41.5. Joe, this is a guy I was not on my radar at all. Hard to not say he was a winner, but I think he'll end up being probably a late-round running back. Is this the type of guy that, again, he's not Isaiah Pacheco, but is this a guy who gets drafted kind of in those later rounds that you're like, let me just stash this guy because he could be something?
Yeah, I think he's definitely worth it, especially depending on where he goes. And I think everyone was excited about Isaiah Pacheco, especially because he's part of that Kansas City offense. That was his hype around Clyde Edwards-Helaire, right? When he got taken at the back end of the first round. Oh, he's going to Kansas City. Like he's going to be a smash play in fantasy. Well, he didn't turn out to be that, but Isaiah Pacheco definitely has. And I think, depending on where he goes, but maybe that won't matter so much. He definitely was. I agree. I didn't know a lot about this guy, but liked what I saw from him at the combine and definitely worth his stash.
Next guy we're going to be talking about, Audric Estime. You like this guy, Joe. Although he didn't perform in the 40-yard dash, he was 4.72, which was pretty low, and a 10-yard split of 1.66. This guy's a bulkier guy at 5'11", 221. So I think out of Notre Dame, what do you think, Joe? He's that power back. You think there might be some interest there?
Yeah, I mean, I was interested just from like his stats this past year at Notre Dame and just watching him and how physical of a runner he is. I mean, 40 time was, not what you wanted to see. But he is more of that powered guy. He also is a capable receiver. He had 17 receptions this past year. And, I just think he might be another guy that maybe this combine's not good for him. But if you watch the tape, I liked what I saw from him from Notre Dame.
All right, Joe, last guy we're going to be talking about here is running back Ray Davis out of Kentucky. Guy, I got to tell you, I was very impressed with 5'8" height, 211, 40-yard dash time of 4.52 with a 10-yard split of 1.56 and a 35 vertical jump. A guy who, if I'm not mistaken, has had 3,000 rushing yards, or it was 1,000 rushing yards per season, and he's been in 3 different schools. I know Daniel Jeremiah was raving about this guy. He seems like a guy in my view, like I'm just the name is getting stuck at like almost like a Mike Davis type. I know he's Ray Davis, but in no relation to my knowledge. But he's a guy that I think could be drafted in the middle round, and just based on his running style, it looked almost like a bowling ball. I kind of liked him.
Yeah, I kind of liked him as well. And like you said, he definitely is that bowling ball type. And I guess you really are turning over a new leaf, Steve. I mean, you're calling out a guy that's 5'8". In the past, you were like, "Oh, 5'8" guys, I'm not interested in them."
Well, it just I'm looking more at the style of running back, and to me, like I said, he looks like a bowling ball out there. So to me, you've seen running backs of that type do pretty well. So he's on my radar. I mean, none of these guys. Let's take this into account. There is no Bijan Robinson. There is no Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't expect any of these guys to be drafted in the first round. And I'll be honest with you, from a dynasty standpoint, I don't know if I would draft any of the. I don't know if any of these running backs are worthy of the first round. We're not going to be talking about it, but there's going to be such a deep receiver class. It's a really good quarterback class. You got Brock Bowers. So for me, this running back class, it's a thin group. So, I mean, the landing spot's going to matter immensely. I mean, if you see Blake Corum go to the Chargers, watch out. Playing with Jim Harbaugh, and if Austin Eckler doesn't come back. So, but, it's an interesting group, and I would be willing to take some flyers. Ray Davis is one of those guys.
Yeah, I agree. I from what I was able to see as well, I think he's definitely worth the flyer. And yeah, this, like you said, I mean, the running back class is interesting. None of them are going to get taken that high, but the landing spots and everything else will be impactful for fantasy for sure.
So that does it for our combine evaluation of the running backs. We gave you our winners and our losers. Like I mentioned just a little bit ago, check out our quarterbacks, our receivers, our tight ends, and if you play IDP, we got defense too. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.